who did it, and I just wanted for Anna Judy Coop to be looking at us because I'm going to talk about her. The other part of my prologue is when I got here last night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I decided that I didn't like half of my talk. I became really unsettled, and because I can really stay up, I rewrote the second half. So my folder is a mess. Luckily, I brought bits and pieces from other folders. So this is kind of like a quilt. So you're going to have to bear with me because I hand wrote the second half. And I think I like this one better. But I don't know if this is a good idea to do that, but that's what I did. So, I want to especially thank Professor Onika Labennett, whom I'm just meeting, convener of the symposium, and Africana Studies, with whom I have had, as Richey has indicated, a very long collegial relationship over many years, and journeyed here for various activities. I want to also acknowledge my other family, the Mohanty family, who are sitting in the back, Professor Satya Mohanty, who is in the English department, and his daughter Uma, and I think Satya had a little bit to do with, they're always trying to find an excuse for me to be in Ithaca. I also want to acknowledge my good friend Zila Eisenstein, whose work I've been reading forever, and who I have a close connection with, though I didn't know it at the time. Her parents taught at the Atlanta University Center many, many years ago. I want to acknowledge as well two of my Spelman sisters, Noliwe Brooks, interim chair, and of course Richey, who in many ways have been one of my many surrogate daughters. I have entitled this talk, Black Girl Rebellious, Memories of Girlhood, which is a work in progress, during which I probe, analyze the ways in which Black feminist thinkers, writers, activists across generations have written about the significance of girlhood from the vantage point of their adult selves. I'll be forever grateful to you, Onika, because I had not realized prior to the conference how long in the making this project has been. As founding co-editor of Sage, a scholarly journal on Black women, we published a thematic issue on mothers and daughters, which ended up as a book project entitled Double Stitch, Black Women Write About Mothers and Daughters. This was the first edited collection that focused on Black mother-daughter relationships. And it was during that time that I imagined interviewing Black women writers, such as Toni Cade Bambara, about their relationships with their mothers. When I approached Toni in Atlanta, she looked me straight in the eye and quickly said no. But Linda Perkins' subsequent biography shed some light on their relationship, as well as Toni's relationship with her daughter, Kama, who donated her mother's private papers to our Spelman archives, which the center manages. In part, I believe, because of our annual conference on Toni Cade's amazing life and legacy. During our March conference, we do this every year, during our March conference, we previewed excerpts from filmmaker Louis Massai's documentary on Toni, and mentioned and welcomed not just now Carmen, but also Zoe, her daughter. So 2 generations. And when that documentary comes out, it is going to be amazing. So while working on Double Stitch, I began to conceptualize a book project that would examine the memoirs and private archives of selected black women activists, women, especially feminists, in order to probe more deeply an under-theorized and under-researched topic with respect to black family life. I was interested in a broad range of questions, and I'll just mention a few. Number one, what is the portrait of black girlhood that emerges in selected memoirs or the personal papers of a highly selected group of black women over time? Number two, how did they describe their relationships with their mothers, grandmothers, or other mothers, which is a term that one of the authors in Double Stitch used? What was the nature of their rebellious selves as girls or young women? And in what ways did their various resistances impact their own lives and the socio-political terrain in which they struggled? What motivated them to choose a life of resistance in their early lives? And what sustained them over time? And finally, what can we learn from their examples? And in what ways are their early lives useful to us as we theorize black girlhood in the present? Like I said, I have a mess of paper here. At this juncture, I am reminded of a few quotes from one of the most provocative, revelatory texts, Bell Hooks' Bone Black, Memoirs of Girlhood, which was published in 1991, in which she reminds us that not enough is known about the experience of black girls in our society, and there is no one story of black girlhood. She was thinking primarily about the U.S. context, but I think her claim is correct. When Bell Hooks penned her narrative, the field of black girlhood studies had not emerged, even though Joyce Ladner's Tomorrow's Tomorrow, which was published in 1995, was out there. A quick genealogy, and this would be very quick, would include, and I'm talking about the genealogy of black girl studies, would include, and this is not a linear genealogy, it would include the emergence in 2016 of the History of Black Girlhood Network, a loose collective of scholars researching the experience of black girls globally, which was catalyzed by 3 black women in the aftermath of a conference on the history of children and youth in England. Were you there, Anita? In March, the group hosted its first conference at the University of Virginia, and we can now name a growing cadre of young scholars, including, of course, Professor Bennett, who are pioneers in the field as a result of groundbreaking monographs. And I just will mention a few of them because there are too many to name all of them. And they're not named in any particular order. Lakeisha Michelle Simmons's Crescent City Girls, The Lives of Young Black Women in Segregated New Orleans, 2015. Ruth Nicole Brown's Black Girlhood Celebration Toward a Hip-Hop Feminist Pedagogy, and her second book, Here Our Truths, The Creative Potential of Black Girlhood, that's 2013. Monique Morris's, which has probably had a tremendous impact because of its policy implications, Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, Marsha Chatelain's Southside Girls, Growing Up in the Great Migration. I have not included pioneer texts surrounding the African diaspora, though I have a long list of those. Conferences are proliferating, including the one I think, Onika, you did attend in April of 2016 at Columbia University, which got a tremendous amount of attention of Black Girls Movement. While I am a student, and I want to really emphasize that, while I am a student in this new field within Black women's history and Black feminist studies, not an expert, I want to begin, and this was the half of the paper that I haven't disrupted. I want to begin, because I wasn't sure who all was in the audience, I want to begin by providing what is a really chilling picture of the plight of Black girls and young women in the contemporary United States. And then after I do this, I'm going to move to the upbeat part, the rebellious part. So the first, and this was stunning to me, and it's really hard to believe. According to a study conducted by Black Women's Blueprint, a radical black feminist organization located in Brooklyn, New York, who organized the Words of Fire conference that will convene at the Women's Center at Spelman next weekend, 60% of black girls have experienced some form of sexual abuse before they are 18. A similar study was conducted by the Black Women's Health Imperative, formerly National Black Women's Health Project, 7 years ago, and they argued that the rate was actually 40%. In studies of black women's sexuality, conducted by psychologist Dr. Gail Elizabeth Wyatt, half of the women that she experienced, half of them admitted that they were sexually abused and had never told anyone, nobody. We now know that African American women are raped at a higher rate than white women in the U.S. and are less likely to report it. And the only group of women who experience sexual abuse more than us are Native American women. I want to pause right here and read something from Audre Lorde's Zombie, which I had actually missed until a researcher came to the Spelman Archives. We have the Audre Lorde papers. Janetta Cole donated the Audre Lorde papers, and we get hundreds of researchers. And the researcher came there and said, I want to look at her journals and see if there's more there about Audre Lorde's own rape as a 10-year-old girl in New York. And so I just want to, it's one paragraph, and I had really missed it, and I'm now really in the journals. And where's Professor Patton? Your work has really influenced how I see things and think about things, because one of the things you're going to hear in my narratives is almost all of these women that I'm going to talk about were whipped badly by their parents. So let me just, I just want to read this 2 paragraphs. 4 years before, she's talking about the fact that she hasn't had her menstrual cycle, and her mother takes her to the doctor, presumably to find out why, but probably to make sure she's not pregnant. Takes her to the doctor, and so this stimulates this particular paragraph from Audre. But 4 years before, she's 10, so she's talking about herself at age 14. But 4 years before, I had to find out if I was going to become pregnant, because a boy from school, much bigger than me, had invited me up to the roof on my way home from the library, and then threatened to break my glasses if I didn't let him stick his thing between my legs. And at that time, I knew only that being pregnant had something to do with sex, and sex had something to do with that thin pencil-like thing, and was in general nasty, and not to be talked about by nice people. And I was afraid my mother might find out, and what would she do to me then? I was not supposed to be looking at the mailboxes in the hallway of that house anyway, even though Doris was a girl in my class at St. Mark's who lived in that house. And I was always so lonely in the summer, particularly that summer when I was 10. So after I got home, I washed myself up and lied about why I was late getting home from the library, and got a whipping for being late. That must have been a hard summer for my parents at the office, because that was the summer that I got a whipping for something or almost every day between the 4th of July and Labor Day. When I wasn't getting whippings, I hid out at the library on 135th Street and forged notes from my mother to get books from the closed shelf and read about sex and having babies and waiting to become pregnant. Audre never shared with anybody her rape at age 10. The second thing I want to mention in terms of realities, and this has come up a lot in this gathering, so I will be very quick about this, and this is the issue of missing black girls. So I'll just mention a little bit of the stats and just sort of repeat what everybody has been saying. We know about the ways in which this culture freaks out almost when upper middle class white girls or women are missing. I mean, we see this on the news. In any case, a 2016 report of the National Conference of State Legislatures revealed that 46% of runaways and homeless youth report. So what I'm doing is giving the counter story of what you've heard, that these girls are not being snatched, from a bush. So this is what the stats indicate: that 46% of them have been physically abused. 38% report having been emotionally abused. 17% report having been forced into unwanted sexual activity with a relative or member of their household. And I just say here that I'm very pleased that Professor Patton wrote a really compelling article about the missing girls in Washington, D.C., so I don't need to repeat that. Third depressing reality: transgender women and young girls of color face a disproportionate risk of violence. 35% of homicide victims in the LGBTQ community and HIV-impacted communities in 2014 were transgender females of color, according to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs. And I want to just remember these three transgender human beings who got some attention in the news in New Orleans. Sierra McElveen, China Gibson, and Jacarius Holland. And I don't think any of these murders have been solved yet. I remember them also because a good friend of mine, Freddie Hill, who's become an amateur photographer in New Orleans, knew these women very well. As a result of the research of the African American Policy Forum, co-founded by Kimberly Crenshaw and Luke Harris, and I'm very close to this work as a member of the board. We now know, and we could spend a really long time on this, but I just want to mention a few things, and I also want to just mention, because this context gets left out. We now know that black girls receive more severe sentences when they enter the juvenile justice system, and rather than repeat all of this, I want to just say that you should really look at the report that the African American Policy Forum released and also pushed out, over-policed and underprotected. The more complex context of this is that the African American Policy Forum was the only black organization that took on President Obama's blackmail initiative. The African American Policy Forum, and I'm not sure that people know this, is the group that challenged the endangered black male, black boy thesis that President Obama perpetrated. And basically what they argued is that we cannot just privilege the situation of black men and boys. And I would just say that Kimberly and Luke traveled to the White House and were treated very badly. Reverend Al Sharpton was the liaison between the White House and the organization. They were basically chastised like they were graduate students, and basically said, given all of the complexity that the president is having out there, how dare you embarrass him? And African American Policy Forum also tried to generate some resistance among very progressive black folk, and we hit up against a stone wall. Nobody wanted to challenged the Black Male Initiative or Obama. So the Say Her Name, the Say Her Name project, which has been tied to Black Lives Matter, and the history of the African American Policy Forum has somehow fallen out of that. I want to say that we need to put that back in its appropriate historical context. The reason that we talk about Say Her Name is because of the work of Kim Crenshaw, and unfortunately, that's not out there. And at the last board meeting, which was 2 days ago, we're trying to, make sure that that work is important. Now to my book project. And one of the reasons I never got back to it was that these other book projects that you mentioned captured my attention, and I wasn't able to juggle. So I don't know how much time I have. So I'm going to get through the. Well, no. So I'm going to just give you a little taste of this book project, and what I've done is for today singled out 4 situations. One has to begin in a project like this with Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, which was published in 1861. It is the story of Harriet Jacobs, who used the pseudonym Linda Brent. She began writing her narrative after escaping to New York. It was, of course, edited by Marie Child, and unfortunately, Black male scholars decided that this was an inauthentic narrative, including the likes of John Blasingame. So the narrative was not taken very seriously, or I don't want to say the word demonized, but it was perceived to be one of those fake narratives that a white person did, and it was sort of shell. And so, thanks to Jane Yellen, who spent an inordinate amount of research verifying or authenticating, we now have this, we can reclaim this narrative, and I actually remember reading this narrative as a graduate student. I would say it is the earliest account that we have of Black girlhood and adolescence during slavery. And I want to just give a little bit about this extraordinary narrative, not assuming that everybody in the room knows it. Born a slave in Edenton, North Carolina in 1813, Linda was relatively happy as a young child with her brother, parents, and grandmother, though her circumstances changed drastically after her mother died. And one of the things that I noticed in these narratives is the huge impact of the death of parents. And in some cases, these Black women became orphans, or in the case of someone like Ida Wells Barnett, became an adult really quickly when both of her parents overnight succumbed to yellow fever in Memphis, Tennessee. In any case, at age 6, she is sent to live in the so-called big house with her mother's owner. After a few years, her caretaker dies and bequeaths Linda to a relative. Her new masters are cruel and neglectful, and Dr. Flint, I would say the quintessential evil master, the father, tries to force her to have sex with him. And it's very interesting, he never rapes her, which is probably one of the few narratives or situations, and I'll mention in a minute why that's the case. He starts making sexual advances to her when she reaches puberty, but she resists, which is amazing. She resists by, this is interesting, she decided, and this she's between 11 and 13. She decides, she crafts this plan, and she decides that what she will do is that she will enter into a relationship with another white male voluntarily, another white male, in order to fend evil Flint off. And she's assuming or hoping that Flint will be so upset that he will stop his sexual advances. And so she gets into a consensual, and I'm using that like this, relationship with Mr. Sands, has two so-called illegitimate children by him, and but Mr. Flint continues his sexual advances, but he is still wanting to have her succumb to his seduction rather than have her be raped, which is interesting. Fearing that her children, Benny and Ellen, will be sold. By this time, Flint has taken her out of the big house and made her become a field slave where supposedly she'll have a worse life. She contemplates an escape for the three of them while still working on Flint's advances, which happened over years. I mean, it's hard to even imagine this. And she continues to refuse to submit to his abuse or abandon her family. That is, she could have probably managed to escape by herself, but she couldn't manage to do this with three people. She decided that since she could not keep Flint from off of her, she decided to hide in the attic of her grandmother, Aunt Martha's, in Aunt Martha's cabin, where she stayed for 7 long years. And we know, of course, the narrative of the Diary of Anne Frank, but we don't know the narrative of Linda Brent. Flint assumes that she has gone north, so he eventually sells her children to a slave trader, but the slave trader, he doesn't know this, is secretly attached to Sands. Over this 7-year period, if you can imagine, she becomes physically debilitated as a result of the confinement because she can't stand or sit. And the only joy that she has in life during this 7-year confinement is that she's able to look out through a small peephole and see her children playing. I won't continue the rest of this narrative. It's an amazing narrative, but what this underscores is the absolute horror of her girlhood, but the absolute rebelliousness. And it's hard to analyze how Linda Brent managed. My second subject for the project is Anna Cooper. People know more about her. I'm going to be more brief. Born a slave in 1858 or 1859. Her father is her mother Hannah's slave master who never acknowledged her, even though she worked as a domestic servant in his household. By the way, she managed to live to be 105. And her extraordinary resistances and intellectual work are legendary. I just want to mention, in the little time I have, 2 things with respect to her rebellious self. She manages to get to a normal school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she begins normal school there. She's precocious. She says no to the ladies' course. She said, no, you're not going to put me in the ladies' courses. I want to take the same courses that the men are taking. And so she takes the classics curriculum, and she learns math and the classics and 4 languages, 3 of which she is able to speak fluently later. She becomes a teacher at that same school and eventually ends up being one of the earliest black women to enroll at Oberlin College. They try to get her to take the ladies' course. She says no, and so that early rebelliousness is amazing. My next person is Pauline Murray. The story of Pauline Murray is so incredible until I won't be able to do it justice, but I want to just mention there's a recent biography out on Pauline Murray, and there's also another text by Pat Bell Scott that talks about the 20-something year relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Pauli Murray, which has an incredible title like the 5 Grand Beats, whatever the rest of it is. And there are a lot of things that I thought I knew about Pauli Murray that I didn't. So let me just, I want to just talk about 2 things. I have read, as most of you did, Pauli Murray's memoir, which leaves out most of her many aspects of her personal life. So I just want to read two aspects, and I don't have time to paraphrase it, so I'm just going to read it. So Pauli Murray was born November 20, 1910. This was the year that the NAACP was founded, so she's born at a very politically engaged time. When she was, I didn't know this, when she was 3 years old, her mother suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage on the family staircase and died on the spot. Her father, left alone with his grief and 6 children under the age of 10, sent her to live with a maternal aunt, Pauline Fitzgerald, after whom she was named. This is the part that I didn't know. 3 years later, ravaged by anxiety, poverty, and illness, Pauli's father was committed to the Crownsville State Hospital for the Negro insane, and there were lots of these, where in 1922, a white guard taunted him with racist epithets, dragged him to the basement, and beat him to death with a baseball bat. Pauli, who then was only 12 years old, traveled alone to Baltimore for the funeral, where she acquired her second and final memory of her father. Laid open in an open casket, his skull split open like a melon and sewed together loosely with jagged stitches. She's 12 years old. The second aspect of the memoir that I want to talk about very, very briefly is, which Pauli never talked about in her memoir, was her believing that she was actually a boy. What we would now use the rubric of transgender to describe Pauli Murray. As a small girl, she preferred boy clothes. She preferred boy chores. She renamed herself Paul, and also at a certain point called herself Dude. She experienced tremendous mental health challenges as a result of the dissonance between her gender identity and the body that she felt she was trapped in. And in fact, she was so convinced that she was a boy that she had the doctors examine her internally to see if there were some hidden male organs there. She also tried very, very hard to change her gender by using male hormones, which did not work. And she was in and out of mental health hospitals for most of her life. Despite that, the legacy of Pauli Murray in terms of her political, intellectual, and feminist theorizing is amazing. And when I think about what Pauli Murray was able to do, given what I just described, including eventually becoming a professor at Brandeis, she was poor for most of her life, and in fact, when she was a sophomore at Hunter College, she suffered from malnutrition, lost 20 pounds, and could barely get to class. And then finally, at the end of her life, she's 73, she decides to become an ordained Episcopalian priest, left her comfortable professor job, and died a couple of years later. One of the things that I really remember, and I've got to find it, is that when Sage Scholar Journal was founded, we got the most incredible note from Pauli Murray. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I knew who Pauli Murray was at that time. And then I want to talk about Claudette Colvin. One of the most important figures in the civil rights movement, probably someone that most folk have never heard of. Risha would have heard of her because she's from Montgomery, Alabama. I heard of her because I taught at Alabama State. In any case, she was among, how am I doing on time?
You're great.
Okay. Claudette was among the 5 plaintiffs, including the federal bus court case filed by legendary civil rights attorney Fred Gray, February 1st, 1956. The case is Browder versus Gale. At age, see, how old was she? At age 16. At age 16, Claudette sat down, was sitting on the bus in Montgomery, not in the white section, but in the colored section. And when a white woman came onto the bus, which was the protocol then, I can remember very clearly, the bus driver got up, came there. She was sitting with three friends and told her to get up and move. Her friends got up. She stayed in her seat and started shouting out her constitutional rights. She was a member of the NAACP Youth Council and was fierce. That didn't deter him. He called the police, and she is 16 years old, and she's arrested, thrown into jail. Now, there's an interesting backstory here, which has to do with the ways in which race, gender, and class intersect. The women of the Women's Political Council, this is 9 months before Rosa Parks sits down. The Women's Political Council wanted to use the Claudette Colvin case as a case to get the Montgomery bus boycott going, and the mainstream, mostly black male civil rights establishment said, no way are we going to have Claudette Colvin, a teenager from the wrong side of the tracks, promiscuous. No way are we going to have her be involved in our cases. They lied on her and said she was pregnant, but she was not. And she was constructed as having misbehaved on the bus. In other words, not only did she not move, but she, opened up her mouth. And so she fell into the category of disruptive, loud, difficult black girls and women that is a stereotype that we have not been able to shake. Now, during the bus boycott, she becomes pregnant as a teen, forced to drop out of school, which is what girls had to do then, was accused of sleeping with a white guy because the child was very light-skinned. I don't know why we wouldn't be familiar with that. She is demonized so badly in the black community until she flees the South and goes north and becomes a nurse's aide, and has a challenged life around. She never finished her education and has a challenged life. Claudette also harbored, as you can imagine, not resentment, but some frustration that Rosa Parks became the legendary, iconic figure in the Montgomery bus boycott. There's a wonderful memoir, Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice, which is her story that was gathered by a Philip House that is really, really compelling. There's more about Claudette, but I'm going to forget that. And I want to end with Bell Hooks, who more than anybody who's living has chronicled her experience with patriarchy within her own household as a young girl, and illuminates an aspect of black girlhood that is compelling and riveting. I've had a very long, loving, and complex relationship with Bell Hooks for 30 or 40 years. And I have to call her tomorrow and tell her that I reread Born Black, and I can now understand some of our complexity. But I want to read, and again, Professor Patton, I've been really influenced by what you have forced us to see. I want to just read some passages from Understanding Patriarchy. This is not from Born Black, because it's one of the few narratives we have about Black girlhood, which unmasks how we treat each other within our own communities. And so I just want to read a little of this. When my older brother and I were born, with a year separating us in age, patriarchy determined how we would each be regarded by our parents. Both our parents believed in patriarchy. They had been taught patriarchal thinking through religion. At church, they had learned that God created man to rule the world and everything in it, and that it was the work of women to help men perform these tasks, to obey and to always assume a subordinate role in relation to a powerful man. They were taught that God was male. These teachings were reinforced in every institution they encountered. As their daughter, I was taught that it was my role to serve, to be weak, to be free from the burden of thinking, to caretake and nurture others. My brother was taught that it was his role to be served, to provide, to be strong, to think, strategize, and plan. I was always more interested in challenging patriarchy than my brother was, because it was the system that was always leaving me out of things that I wanted to be a part of. In our family life of the 50s, marbles was a boys' game. My brother had inherited his marbles from men in the family. He had a tin box to keep them in, all sizes and shapes, marvelously colored. They were, to my eye, the most beautiful objects. We played together with them, often with me aggressively clinging to the marbles I liked best, refusing to share. When Dad was at work, our stay-at-home mom was quite content to see us playing marbles together. Yet Dad, looking at our play from a patriarchal perspective, was disturbed by what he saw. One evening, my brother was given permission by Dad to bring out the tin of marbles. I announced my desire to play and was told by my brother that girls don't play with marbles, that it was a boys' game. This made no sense to my 4 or 5-year-old mind, and I insisted on my right to play by picking up marbles and shooting them. Dad intervened to tell me to stop. I did not listen. His voice grew louder and louder, and suddenly he snatched me up, broke a board from our screen door, and began to beat me with it, telling me, "You're just a little girl. When I tell you to do something, I mean for you to do it." He beat me and he beat me, wanting me to acknowledge that I understood what I had done. His rage, his violence captured everyone's attention. Our family sat spellbound, wrapped before this pornography of patriarchal violence. I remember this traumatic event so well because it was a story told again and again within our family. No one cared that the constant retelling might trigger post-traumatic stress. The retelling was necessary to reinforce both the message and the remembered state of absolute powerlessness. The recollection of this brutal whipping of a little girl daughter by a big, strong man served as more than just a reminder to me of my gendered place. It was a reminder to everyone watching, remembering, to all of my siblings, male and female, and to our grown woman mother, that our patriarchal father was the ruler in our household. So I want to stop by saying I don't really have an ending to this talk. I was not able to come up with an ending, but I do want to end with thinking about my own girlhood, which I have not really done. My mother, Ernestine Granado Guy, was probably the first feminist I ever knew. She left my father when I was in the 8th grade, moved back with her parents, never remarried, and raised her 3 daughters to be independent, self-reliant, and resourceful. When I was in the 9th grade, it's 1958, she petitioned the Memphis Public Schools to waive their home economics requirement for all female students and demanded that I be allowed to take typing, which was reserved for juniors and seniors. This act of feminist defiance on her part sent several clear messages to me early on. That learning to be a homemaker was relatively unimportant, that the skills of a typist would be more useful to me as a serious college-bound student, and that one could resist patriarchal authority, including white patriarchal authority, which was the norm in Memphis. Whenever I reflect upon my journey to feminism, I always invoke the memory of my mother, who died too soon at age 62 of breast cancer, before I got a chance to say to her how much she had influenced her first, sometimes contrary, always talking back daughter. In one of our last conversations during her final hospital stay, after I had shown her my recently published book on Spelman College, the second book I co-edited, she told me how proud she was of my accomplishments and what a good daughter I had been, though I had not followed the conventional route of motherhood and was soon to be divorced. Preferring instead to produce books, she thought out loud. She said, oh, I finally get it. Preferring instead to produce books, I was finally forgiven by my mother on that hospital bed and granted permission to continue my intellectual passions. One of my most cherished articles is the one John Blake wrote for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in March of 1982 on the status of women's studies, which he entitled, Independent, Mom was Professor's First Role Model, which began with this appropriate statement. Beverly Guy-Sheftall's mother didn't know what feminism was, but she embodied its principles. And finally, just a few random thoughts. Once I was a girl, super shy, sheltered, smart, solitary, sweet, serious, big legs, small breasts, unruly hair, wished it was straight like my mother's, long like my sister's, self-effacing, modest, unaffectionate, bookworm, studious, very nearsighted, sometimes silly, oldest of 3 girls, one rambunctious, the other one quiet, fierce, brilliant mother, non-patriarchal father, wary of boys, preferred girls, would rather read than eat, except for strawberry milkshakes, dreaded those menstrual cycles, loved my adventurous, artistic dad, maybe more than my mom, then, not now, not now. Thank you. It's been amazing. So,
we have a little bit of time for questions. Shay's going to take some questions from the audience. Give you a second. Here, I'll give you this one.
Well, I always love hearing Beverly hold forth. And while you were reading from the Bell Hooks narrative, I was thinking of Alice Walker's. And there's, and I couldn't help but make some comparisons, because Alice certainly talks about the sexism in her family, particularly with her brother. But somehow, with Belle, I hear, and I hadn't read that myself before, but in hers I hear her analyzing and complaining about the patriarchal structure and system in her home. With Alice Walker, I get a kind of ascription of evil to the form that patriarchy took in her family. Ascription of evil, possibly even to the males in her family. Do you sense that kind of qualitative difference there? Because I feel sorry when I read Alice Walker's account. When I hear Bell Hooks, I empathize, and I don't know whether hers is more intellectual while Walker's is more emotional. I don't know, but I just feel so sorry for Alice Walker when I read hers. Do you have any?
One of the things that I would say, and I think this may not have been true for Alice. Belle had a very loving grandfather, and the chapter on him in Bone Black would just. So she had very little, and I would say, Zila, you can chime in. Belle continued to love her father, and I don't think that she thought he was evil. I think that she thought that he learned. I mean, this is what you see there, that her parents learned patriarchy, and we would say they learned, or he learned that you whip children. Though in this case, which I think he's not whipping her to protect her from white supremacy. He's whipping her because she's violating gender norms. And so the other thing that I would just simply say is that Alice is not a theorist. I mean, Alice is not doing systemic structural analysis, and that's what you see, I think, that's what you see here. So but no, I don't think that Belle thinks that her father was evil. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? And Alice actually came to reconcile her attitude about her father, and you see that in the way in which Mr. in the color purple is reimagined. Yeah.
My comment and question is the first panel this morning focused on a kind of physical violence, and maybe an aspect of the question is Alice, although it was considered to be an accident with
Yes.
her eye,
Right.
she analyzed it as the consequence of the patriarchal arrangement, even among the children, in terms of what they could play with. So Belle didn't have that experience, so maybe it could have contributed to make that different assessment of the implication. I don't know what you think.
No, I agree. I agree. She called it a patriarchal wound. Yeah, and she sort of. It was an accident, but her point was that parents allow boy children to play with guns without thinking about the potential consequences.
I don't know, like I'm thinking about so many different things, but one is the reimagining of Blackness. for Black girls and Black girlhood, because like your experience and the experience that you charted, I think that many of us in this room, I know I have experienced some of the things, rape, sexual trauma, also being hurt by Black women in the academy, and that completely alienating you from the work that you come here to do, right? And so I guess like kind of my question or me seeking some type of resolution with that, and maybe there is none, is how do we reimagine ourselves through the university, through our communities, through the work that we do, unapologetically, because even, like I'm sure some of us are in, Binder? And I don't even feel that's a safe space, because people that I work with are in there who have abused me, who have abandoned me, who have, treated me worse than others. And so, hearing this narrative, or the narrative that you spoke forth, it was like truth. And I've never experienced attending a historically Black college. I wish that I had. I've always been at PWIs. So I've always come to women's studies and Africana studies. I have a PhD in Africana studies. Seeking that type of like kinship and family and community. And it was a very interesting experience that didn't really give me that sense of community as to why or how I came to the field. So I don't know, I think it's a question somewhere in there, but I feel so just fed through your talk, because I've never experienced a professor in my 10 plus years in the academy that was able to give me what you gave me in this talk. So I thank you.
I've had a very complex relationship with Spelman College. So, a very complex relationship. A very different relationship than if I had been at a majority white, but a very complex relationship. And I'm trying to work on this memoir and trying to capture some of that complexity. So I know what you mean. I will say though, and frequently when I say this to Black women who've been in the white academy, I have not been bruised or damaged by my work in the academy at Spelman. Frustrated, I can say a whole lot of things, but not bruised. No one has ever questioned my intellect. They question my politics, they question my sexuality, a lot of gossip, a lot of petty stuff, but I don't have to deal with, where did you get your PhD from?
Indiana.
I will say that I was snatched off the tenure track by the Black male president when I founded the Women's Center, and had to write him a nasty letter and threaten, though I didn't have $3, threatened to have a legal response. But that was about my radical feminist politics. So yeah, I know. Maybe somebody else wants to weigh in on that. But when I go around talking to Black women, I would say unequivocally, I cannot imagine a better life than the life I've had as a professor. And I cannot imagine a life without the kinds of students that I have had now for 47 years at Spelman and 2 years at Alabama State, almost 50 years. And I would say that those students, Richey is, I cannot imagine that anything could have been better than to try to politicize and nurture. And in my case, because at Spelman, 99% of the people who sit in my classes are African American, women of African descent from all, and I cannot imagine a life that would have been better than that.
I can say briefly myself that it was a unique blessing to be able to be educated at a place like Spelman, because I think that there is a kind of safety there, a kind of support. I literally, as you can see from even my remarks in my introduction, fell in love with so many of my professors and really deeply admired and appreciated everything that they gave, and in some cases have maintained continuing contact over the years and have continued to be taught. I think that it was the kind of experience that really sent me out into the world with a lot of advantages, and it was very empowering. So I wasn't really even anticipating in a sense that I wouldn't find that elsewhere. And I think that was the big disappointment in making the transition into the quote-unquote real world, as some people put it, because it's the kind of situation where you see that, say, not every black woman is your sister, or not every black woman is necessarily as invested in mentoring or will necessarily support or advance your interests. And I think, those are sobering lessons that a lot of people have critically engaged, thank goodness. The project of presumed incompetent in more recent years, I think, has been a valuable resource in terms of helping many people to grapple with the contradictions that black women and other women of color scholars can face when they enter institutions, initially as graduate students and then eventually as professors, because the challenges can be very real and, for some never really disappear. And so increasingly, I think we need to think about strategies that can help us and sustain us. And so Presumed Incompetent is just that monumental book that provides a very useful resource. They also have a site on Facebook that they're continually updating. Another resource that I highly recommend is Deborah Gray White's book, Telling History. Cover to cover is just a beautiful and brilliant read. I only wish there were an analog in literary studies where we're hearing brilliant and distinguished historians talk about their experiences in the profession from a personal standpoint. We know we've read their books, but to hear their stories, I think, makes such a difference. And so I think that, in sharing your story, you've really contributed in a powerful way. And that's one strategy for healing too.
I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about fear. How to get free from fear. That fear is often implanted in us as children, often by our mothers, fearing black males, fearing the police, and it's infused in how we're socialized and how we speak and so on and so forth. And I don't know if you've seen some sort of generational shift in younger black women scholars and how they speak in public spaces, particularly on social media. Like, I'm irreverent, I curse all the time, I snatch wigs, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I have my older black women scholars who've lectured me about my behavior in social media spaces. But I'm absolutely fearless because I feel like, black women are always wrong, so I might as well just take advantage of it and do wrong anyway. But with all the changes in the academy, the corporatization of higher ed, fewer people getting tenure, the conservative forces sort of colonizing higher ed, it's going to have real implications for the kind of scholarship we do, for our activism, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if you can address fear, sort of linking it from our girlhood experiences to the kind of women we become and how we speak and conduct ourselves in and outside of the academy.
So let me just say, being of a generation who was not in the public sphere because of the internet, I cannot imagine what it would have been like if I were the age of young people with social media and experiencing the cyber bullying and terrorism. I'm going to just give you one example. our amazing women's studies feminist students who organized a mobilization against misogynist hip-hop a few years ago began to experience from our students at Spelman and students in Morehouse a huge internet attack. Their names were called out. They were called lesbians. Our students, some of our students went online and said, guys in Morehouse, come over here and beat their asses. And this is who they are, and here's where you can find them. I have no capacity to understand that. And these are some of those students I know. And number two, those students were petrified. And I didn't have much, I didn't know, I had very little that I mean, what I said, I'm sure was kind of useless. I talked about how I've dealt, but I never had any public stuff like that. I'm just going to mention, in class Wednesday night, I decided to talk about your book. And I experienced a huge amount of anger and rage on the part of some students in my class. I mean, you know, whipping is fine, blah, 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 blah. And then one of the students really pounced on one of them. And, pounced on two of them. And we talked after class. She was, you know, she asked me, you know, what did you think? I said, you know, you did what you should have done. When she and her friend left my office, 3 of those women were downstairs threatening to beat her ass. It was just really unbelievable. She came back upstairs. She came back upstairs. She was, she could not believe, you know, she just could not believe. She was frightened. She was, you know, so I did the best I could. But what can you say other than, you know, stay here a while? Do you want me to call security? Do we think they're gone? We looked out of the window. I mean, we were like, you know, it was just unbelievable. And she finally calmed down and she went home. And she texted me right before I came to the conference and said that she had shared this with the administrative assistant in the Women's Center and had been advised to report this to the college because she's not even, and this is a very secure, very tough, undocumented, one of the few undocumented students that we've ever had at Spelman from Bahamas. I mean, she is tough and she is fierce. And she says the things that I have been through in life, but that just did something to her. So I don't know that I have good answers for what it's like to be a young person navigating what I think is mean girl culture. And the kind of cyber visibility and cyber bullying and just meanness that I just didn't experience as a college student. You know, it was just no way. I mean, you know, people would talk about you behind your back, but you weren't gonna have any postings. So I don't know. I mean, I sometimes am very empathetic with what you experience on Facebook. And I will just be really candid and honest with you. There's certain things that I just don't put in the public. I'm not talking about, I'm just saying I don't share everything I think about things. I mean, I was very careful. You may remember this, Richey. I was very careful on the panel about Michelle Wallace. I mean, I'm sorry. What's her name? Michelle Obama. I censored myself, and I was glad I did. You know, because that's what happened to Bell Hooks. And she and I've had a long conversation. You know, she was on the panel. She got a question, and she ended up talking about terrorism. Well, you know what happened. And So sometimes I don't like live streaming in Q&A because you just, it leaves you very vulnerable. So I don't know if that was an answer, but there's no way, for example, that I would, when I was doing my underground work trying to make sure that a particular president at Spelman had a short tenure, and also when Paula Giddings and I were doing our underground work, trying to make sure that Janetta Cole would be the first African-American president, this was stealth work. This was underground stealth plotting. Because we knew if our little cells came up on the surface, so I think there are various strategies that one uses, and stealth is one of them. So I don't show all my cards because it's dangerous. I don't know if that's helpful. And let me just say, because I really do need to say this, that's not respectability politics. Okay, that's strategic revolution. Okay, let's be really, really clear that a lot of what old girls like me do, we learn from our mothers, which is there are certain things that you don't reveal. So, yeah.
Are there any further questions? Well, thank you so much.